Hello, this is Dr. Dennis Bielfeldt of the Christ School of Theology. Today we're talking about Spinoza, 17th century metaphysician. And of course his thought was very important for Hegel and for a number of other thinkers. He was thought to be in his day quite a dangerous fellow, and perhaps he still is, even in our day. But we need to know what he's talking about here. He claims there's only one substance. This is God, right? And in God there are other, what he calls modes. It'd be helpful to spell things correctly. There are modes in God. We'll talk about what that is. He rejects any anthropomorphism of God. Big word, anthropomorphism. That means anything that looks like a human being in God. So God doesn't have a personality like human beings do. God doesn't have a will like human beings have, right? What he argues is that all things, now listen to this, follow causally and necessarily from the divine nature. Just as the three angles of a triangle sum to two right angles, just as that follows from the nature of triangularity, so does everything that ever has been, is, and will be follow necessarily from the divine nature. There's one substance, and everything that is an unpacking of that substance. Thus, all things are absolutely and necessarily determined. God could not exist without the world, because the world existing as it is part of the nature of God. Now, God has an infinite number of attributes, as I've said, of which we know two. That's mind and body, right? Those are the two we know. And there are modes now that fall under the attribute of mind, and modes that fall under the attribute of body. And he even talks about infinite modes, which would be, I guess, the universal and eternal aspects of things. Thus, the laws of the universe would be an infinite mode of God falling under the attribute of body. Particular things here, all things here, are acted on by other things in accordance with the universal laws of motion. So there are particular modes governed by infinite modes, all which fall under the attribute of body, and all which are part of the reality of God. Now he's got some great lines. He says, that internal and infinite being we call God, or nature, can be called the same thing, acts from the same necessity from which he exists. Okay, so the deterministic natural order is an unpacking of God's nature. Now he makes a distinction between the natura naturans. This is kind of an interesting distinction. Natura naturans. And those of you who know your Latin know that this is a participle. This is the nature, naturing, right? From the natura, naturata. This is from nature having been natured. So this is nature that is naturing, that is bringing about the nature, and this is nature insofar it has already been natured. It's great. Philosophy is wonderful, isn't it? So, the natura naturans is God in his substance and his attributes. That's the natura naturans. And he claims this, quote, by the natura naturata, I understand whatever follows from the necessity of God's nature, or from any of God's attributes, i.e., all the modes of God's attributes, insofar as they are considered as things that are in God and can neither be nor be conceived without God. So all the infinite and the finite modes here are part of nature, having been natured, right? So what are the ramifications of this? Well, let's just stop to look at this. Everything is absolutely determined and follows inexorably by necessity from the divine nature, which is at the same time nature itself. Obviously, there's no teleology at all in the universe. There is no purpose in the universe. There are no final causes in the universe. God does not act purposefully. God just acts in accordance with his nature, right? Only nature exists, and it is completely deterministic. God, mind, body, is also nature, right? There's nothing outside of nature. There is no supernature. There's nothing supernatural. God is merely the unique, unified, productive, necessary being of the universe. Right? There are no miracles, at least as violations of the laws of nature. Our good friend Spinoza writes, nature has no end set before it. All things proceed by a certain eternal necessity of nature. So now this gets us into the whole question of pantheism, right? He's oftentimes regarded as a pantheist. Pantheism generally holds that God is everything there is and that there is no more to God than what is, right? So God and the universe are identical. And so you could certainly say that he is a pantheist in some sense. Now the scholarship wants to get into this question of whether God is identical with the natura naturans, or with both the natura naturans and the natura naturata, and whether or not pantheism should be defined with respect to one and not with the other. I don't know. I don't. If you define words in a certain way, you can maybe make it be said that he's a pantheist in some sense and not in another. But clearly, the big point here is that he does not regard this nature, which is at the same time God, to be an object worthy of reverence or worship. He does not have any attitude or reverence towards God or nature. And of course, a pantheist would always want to say of the thing that thing is God in a way that probably does demand some awe and worshipful respect. Spinoza, however, thinks that clear and distinct philosophical and scientific thinking is the proper approach to God, is the proper approach to nature, not religious awe and worship. I'll be right back with another quick lecture on Spinoza. This is Dr. Dennis Bielfeldt of the Christ School of Theology. Everything you want to know about Spinoza in about 45 minutes, right? See you soon.